in the UK. And it's really great to be here to listen to these three look like really, really interesting papers. Just a little bit of kind of ground rules for the room. If when the presenters are talking, you can have your microphones off, that would be great. The Q&A is enabled, so please do use that to type questions in. But when we get to the question part after the 20 minutes that the presenters will have, you can also raise your hands. Looks like would be a manageable group, I would imagine. So if you're happy to speak your question, that would be great. Yeah, so shall we get started? So I can see that we've got Zuena here and also Gerda as well, but I will hand the floor over to you and you can introduce yourself. So 20 minutes and then 10 minutes for questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Zuena Adelar. I am delighted to welcome you today to this presentation. Today, we'll explore the transformative power of professional development for university teachers, focusing specifically on the impact of university teaching qualification program on teaching competence and teaching practice. In this presentation, we will share the key findings that could help improve future programs and spark positive change in higher education. But first, let me introduce my country. I am from Suriname. Suriname is in South America and is both a South American country and part of the Caribbean. Suriname is a multi-ethnic country rich in culture and in history. Once a Dutch colony, we gained our independence in 1975, but we still use Dutch as our official language. The country borders, our neighbors are Guyana, French Guyana, Brazil, and to the north we have the Atlantic Ocean. The Anton de Kam University is Suriname's only public university. In 2014, the UTQ, University Teaching Qualification Program, was introduced to the University of Suriname. The program, consisting of a 50-month teaching period, is split into 3 phases. The first being the intake. That is where teachers complete a self-evaluation form to assess their competencies in areas such as professional expertise, preparing and teaching classes, evaluating student learning, organizing education, professional conduct. Those are the competencies. The second phase is the teaching phase, where the university teachers attend workshops on design, assessment, and student guidance, and they conclude that phase with a portfolio. The final phase, that's the assessment. After the portfolio approval, an assessment is conducted by national and international assessors, and if positive, the participants receive a certificate. What do we already know? We know that university teachers' professional development is considered one of the most important factors for success in education. What we see is that university teaching qualification programs have been a standard worldwide. However, how effective are these programs? Do they make a difference? That was the question we also had here at our own university. We know what the key features are for an effective program. Simone identified 5 of those key features, and I will explain our own program based on 3 of these features. In our own program, teachers actively engage in workshops, in peer discussion, so there is active learning. And in the UTQ program, it's carefully aligned with practical challenges, making the program both practical and fitting. Throughout the program, university teachers collaborate through group workshops and discussions, creating a supportive community. So there is collective participation. For this research, we work with two models. The first being the interconnected model of professional growth by Clark and Hollingworth. This model is widely used in teaching institutions. This model emphasizes the interconnectedness of different aspects of teachers' professional development. The model describes the complexity of the process of teacher professional growth in 4 different domains, being the personal domain, domain of practice, the domain of consequence, and the external domain. The UTQ program is part of the external domain. And the changes in the domains occur by reflection and enactment. That's how the changes occurs in all 4 of the domains. But when you start a program, you want to know if the program is working. And one of the ways to know if your program is working is by evaluating. That's where the second model comes in, the Kirkpatrick's model. This model shows how to create an effective evaluation plan for each program so that the organization knows the value of the program. At the same time, an effective evaluation plan will ensure that finances, human resources, limited human resources are spent on the programs that will create the most impact. So you have to evaluate your program. For this research, we evaluate on level 2 and level 3, being level 2, learning transfer, and level 3, behavior change. Behavioral change in their behavior. Specifically, we assess whether the university teacher qualification program has led to changes in teachers, their teaching competence, and in their teaching practices. So the research question that we aim to answer with this research is, according to UTQ certified university teachers, what was the impact of the UTQ program on their teaching competence and their teaching practice? And the sub-questions that will help us answer the main question is, 1, what development in teaching competence took place by university teachers since the start of the UTQ program? And the second question, according to certified teachers, how has their teaching practice developed since participating in the UTQ program? So the 2 things that we're looking at is development in teaching competence and development in teaching practice. Now let's look at the method used to research this question. To answer the question about teaching competence, a self-evaluating form based on 6 teaching competence was filled out by the participants on 3 different occasions. The occasions being at the start of the program, at the end of the program, and 1 to 3 years after finishing the program. So 3 occasions, the participants filled out this form. In total, 45 university teachers participated. To answer the question on teaching practice, 16 university teachers were interviewed. The interview focused on 3 teaching competence: preparing classes, teaching classes, and evaluating student learning. The focus was on behavioral change from the start of the program until a few years after completing the program. So to answer the research question, a mixed method design was used. So the study was initially conducted with cohort 4 to 6. That was the first group. And after some time, we repeated the study with a second group to expand the research and check if we would get the similar results. However, the results turned out to be different. There are differences between cohort 4 to 6, is the first group, and the second group, cohort 7 to 9. The differences are in terms of experience, program, and context. Now I would present the results in teaching competence. But before I present the results, I would like to have a little quiz. Yes. The question is, so now you have to participate. So the question is, what development do you expect between start, end, and 1 to 3 years after the UTQ program? So you saw my timeline. There is a start, there is an end of the program, and there is 1 to 3 years after finishing the program. What is the development that you expect to see? I have answered A to E, and every chart represents an answer. A is no change. Can you use the chat to put in your answer? Yes. A is no change. You expect to see no change. B is stable between start and end, followed by an increase after. C is a steady increase. We're just going up. And D is increase between the start, followed by stable after. And E is increase between start and end, followed by a decrease after. So we have A to E. And I see that you are using the chat. Yes, I see answers. I see answers. Nice, nice. I also had a lot of answers before I started doing this research about what I expected to see. But let's see what the results are. First, I will be presenting the results on cohort 4 to 6. For all those who had chosen answer B, that is indeed the case with cohort 4 to 6, except for the exception of professional conduct. So we see stable between start and end, and no significant changes in competence during the program. So it's stable between start and end, with meaning that there is no significant change in competence during the program, but followed by an increase after the program. So you see the drawing, we have a straight line during the program, and after the program, we have a line going up, an increase. So we wondered, why is change happening after the program and not during the program? Our hypotheses are that, yes, sometimes I have to spell out the words to pronounce them correctly, but it's hypothesis, yes, are that participants initially overestimate their skills, so their unconscious incompetence, but become aware of gaps as they progress, igniting growth. They recognize weaknesses and begin a growth path, moving from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. Yeah. Developing full competence and self-efficacy requires more practice and reflection beyond the program, so after the program. My initial thought was that cohort 7 to 9 would report the same result as cohort 4 to 6, but that was also not the case. So I hope I was clear with this one. These are our hypotheses. So let's look at what the results of cohort 7 to 9 are reporting. For those who had chosen for answer D or C, that's indeed the pattern that we see in cohort 7 to 9. For the first competence, professional expertise, preparing classes, teaching classes, we indeed see that we see an increase between start and end, and after the program, followed by a stabilization for a few years after they completed the program. So an increase followed by a stabilization for the first three. But for the last three competence, evaluating student learning, organizing education, and professional conduct, we see a steady increase from the start to the finish and beyond. So a steady increase we see for the last three competence. Initially, the results were analyzed at a group level, showing overall trends in competence change. When looking at individuals, participants can be categorized in 6 groups based on their change pattern. So for all individuals, there was a chart, and based on their pattern, they were placed in groups, and we came up with 6 different groups. We observed that certain patterns are more prevalent in one cohort than in the other. So we have the first group, cohort 4 to 6, and we have the second group, cohort 7 to 9, and certain patterns were more in one group than in the other. In the pattern, no change followed by an increase. Almost all participants were from cohort 4 to 6. So almost all participants from cohort 4 to 6 are in this group. In the second pattern, increase followed by a stabilization and a decrease has participants of both groups. This suggests that while the UTQ program initially boosts participant competence, after the program, we find that some of their competence remains stable or slightly decline as they return to their regular teaching environment. For the third pattern, consistent increase was mostly observed in participants from cohort 7 to 9, so the second group. The pattern limited change was not reported often. The chart shows a participant who already had a high score at the start of the program, and therefore little improvement was possible in terms of measurement because they already started very high at the beginning of the program. The pattern decrease followed by increase was reported by 4 participants, which aligned with the hypothesis that at least some participants initially overestimate their skills. And the last pattern, increase followed by stabilization or increase, is mostly found by cohort 7 to 9. This suggests that while the UTQ program initially boosts participant competence, after the program, we find that some of their competence remain stable or increase as they return to their regular teaching environment. So this was based on individuals.
Just a minute or so left, Zuena, okay?
Yes. What did you say?
Just a minute or 2 minutes left, yeah. You okay to keep going?
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We also look at the relationship between pattern and background of the participants. This table shows how academic experience level, inexperience, medium experience, or most experience is linked to different growth patterns observed in the study. So we looked at the background of the individuals. This table helps identify which group of academics are more likely to show specific types of development after participating in the UTQ program. We see that experience plays a role in 3 of the patterns, and only in the pattern increase followed by stabilization does age play a role. Now that we've seen the results on teaching competence, we wanted to understand what they learned and how it changed their teaching practice. Specifically, we aim to identify what skills or strategies had the biggest impact on their teaching.
Zoena, we're coming to the end of your kind of 20 minutes. Would you be able to get through to your conclusions, perhaps?
Okay. These are the changes in teaching practice, preparing classes. We see constructive alignment and self-reflection being the main things that we see. And then we have teaching classes, variety of teaching models, structure, student support, assessing student learning. We see assessment quality process, assessment quality constructive alignment. And then we had the discussion on why we see differences between the first group, cohort 4 to 6, and cohort 7 to 9. And then we have the conclusions. Yeah, sorry, I have to rush it a bit.
Do you want to talk through that last slide? I think you could do that.
Okay, we can go to the conclusion. Okay, when we look at the development in teaching competence, significant growth was noticed between start and 1 to 3 years after the UTQ program, and the stage in which growth takes place varies during and or after the program. And for teaching practice, we see that the concept of a constructive alignment helps shape their thinking, so their personal domain, and reflection and experimentation with new strategies lead to more student-centered teaching practices. And then we have some thoughts of reflection and professional development practice. It is important to recognize that each participant's background and context can shape how they learn. Providing opportunities for participants to practice and reflect on new concepts is crucial for their development. Additionally, professional development doesn't end with the UTQ program. When the UTQ program finishes, in fact, the greatest benefits of the program comes after. So it's essential to create an environment that fosters continued growth. Yes. Thank you for your attention, your time and attention. I hope you found the presentation valuable and insightful. And if you have questions, you can answer them now. And I think that Gerda will be stepping in from time to time when it comes to the questions.
Yeah, we've got about 6 minutes. So if you can either raise your hand and you can ask your question directly to Zoena and Gerda, or in the chat as well, if you would prefer to do it that way. Just as people are gathering their thoughts, I've got a question. Is your program compulsory? Is it a requirement or is it something that people choose to do?
From cohort 6, it was for the new teachers, university teachers, it's compulsory. It's in their contract.
Did that impact at all on your data then? That change in kind of policy?
That was one of the reasons why we think that there was a difference between the first group and the second group, because the first group, their what is the name for richtingscoördinator? The first group was
The head of department.
yeah, the head of department was registering participants for the first groups. But for the second group, people were registering their self. So we had more people to participate who wanted to participate instead of they had to participate because somebody gave out their name.
Yeah. Thank you. Jane, we've got a question. I saw your hand up. So Jane, do you want to ask a question?
Thank you. Yeah, that was a really interesting talk. Thank you. And I've seen something similar in my own data as well. So it's reassuring to see to see the same pattern in your data. I was just wondering if you've thought about developing different staff development programs so that you have one pathway for people who are new to teaching and newly appointed into the lectureships versus those people who come to you or have been with you for many years with lots of experience already. So are you developing two teacher training pathways?
Okay. To answer this question, I would like Gerda to step in, because if I have to translate it, it's gonna take 10 minutes.
Yes. Really good question. The start of the program, there was actually a specific program that was shorter in duration, aimed at the more experienced teachers. At some point, we discontinued that program because we found that actually that led to lesser results, and that people were less likely to complete the program than when we kind of required them to join the larger group that had like a really nice mixture of teachers with more and less experience. But in general, we do see differences in how people approach it, as was also very clear from the data. So we try to kind of work with, once we now have more experienced teachers, we really work with them to see like how they can benefit most from the program, because right now the majority will be newer teachers, because those that have been there for a long time already had an opportunity to take the program. So yeah, we had two different separate programs. We discontinued the one for the experienced teachers.
Interesting, thank you.
And this
We are oh, I'm seeing some questions in the chat as well. We are currently working to kind of develop a more a follow-up program, which will be more centered around learning communities, where those that have more experience explore different themes together. So that's what we are currently doing for the more experienced teachers, making sure that it's not just this basic qualification program, but there will be opportunities to deepen their skills. And let me read the question so Suena can probably answer. Interested to know, how did the lecturer's self-evaluation take place?
There was a form. We had a form at the beginning of the program based on 6 competence, and every competence had again different indicators, and the teacher has to give themselves a score per indicator.
So this was an existing form that was created at the start of the program and that we reused for our data. Based on this research, we have actually adapted their self-evaluation form because we found that there were some issues with 2 of the competencies that we wanted to address. So and at the same time, we were working on revising our profile of what the university teachers should be able to do. So this research was used as input for that as well.
Thank you. I see we've got, Vesna's got a hand up. This will be our last question. That's okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for this. This was really interesting presentation, and I'm also here to say that some of our previous research done, I'm located in Finland, actually recognizes similar patterns as you were talking. So it's kind of also comforting to see that this is indeed somehow we are onto something here. I found it interesting how you were talking about the increase and decrease after, well, after the period of time passes. And that actually there has been some research showing that there is a decrease among the self-efficacy beliefs. At least this is some perspective we looked at, because the university teachers possibly overestimated their skills, and then they got encountered, let's say, their ignorance, or at least they thought that, oh my goodness, this is so complicated, I don't know anything about this, and I don't know anything. So they might have a decrease in their self-efficacy beliefs, and then throughout a certain period of time, actually this increased. But this is quite often done in relation to voluntary courses. So I'm just interested now, we were saying exactly that it changed into compulsory course, and then actually there is a steady increase, at least in your findings. So could you just a little bit reflect on this? How would you connect this? How would you reflect on this kind of decrease or increase through time? Thank you.
Ada?
Yeah, so it's actually a very interesting combination, because while it became compulsory for new teachers to join, we also opened it up for people to subscribe themselves instead of being subscribed by their heads of department. So we created an interesting mix of teachers that had been wanting to join the group for a long time, but were waiting for their head of department to sign them up, and the group that had to join from the start. So based on our results, what we see is that actually the group that is truly new to teaching doesn't necessarily overestimate what they can do. They really come in thinking, I don't really know a lot about this, so let me just take in as much as I can. And then it was mainly the group that had been teaching for quite a while, that felt that they were really good at doing things. And then we saw that, like, that stable pattern in which our hypothesis is exactly what you described. During the program, what happened is that they realized, wait, I thought I knew what I was doing, but I was not. And we also actually kind of fed back these charts to the participants that participated in the interview. So we made sure to interview people from the 6 different categories. And we had them reflect on them. And some of them didn't recognize it at all. They were like, "Huh? But I don't understand. Why did that happen?" But there were actually a few that actually named this themselves. I thought I was a really good teacher, and then I realized that there was a lot to learn. So we did get that back from some of our participants as well.
Thank you. Fascinating. That's exactly how I was thinking about it. Thank you.
No, and thank you. Thank you so much for a really interesting presentation at the start to this session. Thank you. We could give you a clap. I'm going to move
Thank you very
over
much.
to our second presentation in this block. We've got Julia. So it's Julia Everett from Birmingham City University, who's representing a much wider research team. So Julia, I'm going to give you time to get your slides if you've got slides.
Yeah. Thanks.
So it's the same kind of setup, 20 minutes plus 10 minutes questions. I'll give you a 2-minute warning, Julia, if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely.
Oh. Okay, can you see that? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, welcome everyone. Yeah, so as our chair pointed out there, this presentation comes from, there's a wider group of us, but it's just me here today presenting the paper to you. So you can see that at the top, it comes from a project called what we call the DigiDoc, and today I'm presenting the supervisor development programme arm of that project. And there's 6 institutions involved, and I'll talk about where they come from, but there's Birmingham City University where I'm based, and then we've got 3 partners in Vietnam, we've got 1 partner in China, and there was a partner in Indonesia. And so it's a I'm just moving the bar out of the way because it's annoying me. So it's a 3-year funded British Council project, the DigiDoc was. And the programme provenance was at Birmingham City University. We've already got the EdD, or the professional doctorate. And what they wanted to do in this project was create this online version, an EDI version of our close to practice doctorate. But they also wanted to develop and pilot an international version of our UK community practice supervisor development programme. And I'll talk a bit about how that came about, the original project. And so I mentioned there that the different partners and the different countries, and how it worked is it started off, once it was successful, it started off with these online monthly meetings, and then we got different international knowledge exchange workshops, we got programme development, and then there was piloting, and then an evaluation. And the project website's there down at the bottom if anybody's interested to have a look a bit more about DigiDoc. See if that will move forward. Okay. So in terms of the focus for the paper, when I submitted it to SRHE, I did that to fit in with the call for papers. So it was around the sustainable development goals and wicked problems, and thinking about transnational education. And there was a previous paper that some of the partners were involved in by Kendall et al., which is referenced on one of the other slides, which talks about how transnational education is under research, but there's also lots of debates about it, you know, thinking about programmes here in the UK that might be undergraduate programmes delivered in other countries, or they might be professional or teacher development programmes, but issues of, you know, UK facilitators and cultural differences and power. But what we do find in research by Kennedy around different types of CPD is communities of practice are seen as more transformative rather than transmissive, and because the facilitators are not labelled as experts, it's there about encouraging agency and openness. And so this paper, as I mentioned, is sharing the piloting of our UK-based accredited community practice programme that was originally developed by Sean Vaughan and Jeff Hill. I know Sean's on the call today. And you can see some of the papers are mentioned there down at the bottom, and also some of the wider literature. Think forward. So thinking about the paper, I drew on literature in terms of supervisor development, looked at transnational education literature, looked at communities of practice literature, and you can see there it talks about what I've just mentioned, the idea of thinking about, you know, where it's worked well, is thinking about agency and openness, and thinking about how we're going to combine the different cultures and practices, and not regarding one company, one country or setting as more of the expert. And so transnational education can work as, you know, you've got flying faculty who go out to the different countries, or it could be delivered online by UK facilitators and then delivered online to the different countries. And that's the model that we were thinking about. So thinking about the community practice programme provenance, so I mentioned it was developed at BCU. So it's been originally developed back in 2015. So it's been running for about 10 years, and it's actually been accredited through CEDA. It originally was face-to-face in small groups, but during COVID it moved online, and there was also a paper written about that by Sean Vaughan et al., referenced there at the bottom. And how the programme works, outlined in some of the literature, is that it's these facilitated conversations. So there's these 6 conversations, and then there's a presentation at the end. And the supervisors take part, and they have this catalyst reading that they're given before they come along to the conversations. And it's normally 2 facilitators who deliver the communities of practice programme. And we also take session notes which are shared, and it's about encouraging that reflection but also speaking to Zarina's presentation, it's very much about that starting point. So it's not that when supervisors have gone through the programme that the finished article, it's very much they're encouraged to, in the BCU programme, to come up with this action plan and what they're going to do going forward. So it's almost a catalyst for starting that professional development. And so you can see it's got these 6 conversations, the last conversations, that presentation, but you can see it talks about, you know, who am I as a member of this community of practice? What do we think about good research supervision? What resources can we use? What do we bring to it? How we going to know we've achieved our aims? And there's different models that it's delivered. It can be monthly, it can be fortnightly and intensive. And I mentioned it's often 2 facilitators, and then we often have a month or two's gap when they go, the supervisors go away and they do a practitioner inquiry. And that inquiry can be through engaging with the literature that we share in the handbook that they get. It can be from talking to other supervisors. It can be from looking at a journal article with a doctoral candidate. It can be trying out a resource or a tool. So there's lots of different ways that in the BCU programme that supervisors approach the practitioner inquiry, and then they come back and they present it. And so thinking about how we were going to develop this within DigiDoc, we had an original project setup meeting that was back in 2021. And I mentioned we had these monthly online project meetings. And then what happened is there was a knowledge exchange workshop that took place in June 2021. And there what they did is the 6 different partners involved from the UK, Vietnam, China and Indonesia shared their mapping of their supervisor development and experiences, and I'll share that with you on a different slide to see how that compares and contrasts across the partners. Then we moved into the development phase, so we actually split then into the 2 groups with the professional doctorate and the supervisor group, and so we would then meet monthly to talk about, you know, the different expectations for the programme and how it might work in different contexts. We were encouraging partners to put forward some of the catalyst reading. So there was potentially some of the reading that we used in the BCU programme that could go forward, but also, you know, what do they currently use? Was there anything that they could put forward that we could include within it? Then there was a second knowledge exchange workshop in Vietnam, slightly delayed due to COVID. And actually at that point, one of the other project team members, Kate Thompson, she piloted one of the questions there, conversation 3, around what is good research supervision. And we saw from the notes of that how the issues that were being generated and discussed, you know, such as around issues in co-supervision, such as around trust, leadership skills, those kind of things. So I could see already what was being generated, that the conversations were working in that knowledge exchange workshop. Then we moved forward into the programme development, recruitment and piloting. So again, we were still having the monthly meetings whilst we were putting the handbook and the pilot version together, you know, how the conversations might work, whether we might include the accreditation and the practitioner inquiry. We sent out a EOI recruitment call for existing supervisors because there's a stipulation on the BCU programme that supervisors, you know, they need that experience to speak to. So we brought that same stipulation into this pilot. And we were setting up a Teams channel because that's how we were going to deliver the programme. And so this slide shows that results from the knowledge exchange workshop. So all of the partners did a PowerPoint presentation, and I've just drawn that together for this. And you can see then the first column, this is BCU. So we have a team or co-supervisory panels, normally of a director of studies and a second supervisor, and then often a second supervisor or a third supervisor, and then sometimes optional internal and external advisors. So we do have mandatory training at BCU, so initial sessions around the regulations, and a small amount of pedagogy within that, but a lot around the policies and procedures, preparing for Viva, preparing for the upgrade, that kind of thing. And then the COP programme is built into our policy. But interestingly, at BCU, the regulations specify that there needs to be 2 completions within the supervision team. So that means that early career academics can supervise. So almost as we're crossing the border, as Mokshain and McKenna call it, from candidate to supervisor, you know, doctoral candidates can then start supervising. So I think that training is, you know, the feedback we get is very helpful. But you can see there the next 3 columns from Vietnam. The differences there is that there isn't that training, there isn't that preparedness or professional development, but then more advanced academics. So again, it's 2 supervisors or 1 expert, but they need to be a minimum associate professor or a full professor. And again, very similar in China and NU and Indonesia. But China, they offer training, as it's mentioned, but that's a gap in the other countries. So hence the need for the development and welcoming of the, you know, piloting this program. So thinking how the pilot version of the community practice was going to work, we decided amongst the team that it was going to be delivered over 4 days. So the BCU program can sometimes be 4 meetings, or sometimes it can be 6, but we decided for this it was going to be 4, and we thought that 2 days in the week, I think it's 2 Wednesdays or something like that, and then 2 Saturdays to see whether that would encourage attendance. We split up the conversations, as you can see on this slide, but we couldn't offer the accreditation, and we decided not to do the practitioner inquiry because of the timescales of the piloting. And so our conversation 6 was more around a reflective accounting discussion. And the pilot was evaluated for a focus group and a survey, and that was launched in that final session. I think originally we wanted 25 pilot members, I think in both arms of the programme. Actually, we had 14, but not everybody attended all of the sessions, which is interesting. You can see there in that final column. And we find in the community of practice that once people have come along and they've started to share, that it's really good if people attend all of the sessions. And actually for the accreditation, that's something that is compulsory in the BCU program. I think it impacts that kind of you know, cohesiveness when people are dipping in and out. But unfortunately, we found here with people being able to make sessions, which we find in the BCU program, yeah, that they didn't attend all the sessions. So what did we find out? So obviously we ran that the focus group and the survey, but what we've also done for the paper that we're writing as a result of this is including some kind of partner reflections as well. But we found that they were making connections from supervisors from different countries. You'll see I've got a couple of quotations where they call it, you know, that cross-cultural and the different multi-dimensions. They found that was useful. And as we found with the BCU program, there was the positive encounters with the literature about supervision. In the end, in the development stage, the partners didn't put forward any research scholarly literature for us to use, perhaps because they don't, you know, they don't engage with it because they don't have the professional development. So I actually chose some to be included, which are on the next slide. But what we did use, they did find it useful. They like some of the tools and frameworks that were shared, again, something that we do in the BCU program. And some of them actually found new approaches that were discussed, that they were trying out. And you know, it was challenging their own assumptions, because obviously we know from the literature when we start to supervise, we've generally got our own experience of being supervised that we start with, and it was helping them to frame doctoral supervision as an academic practice, which again we see in the BCU programme. So you can see down the right hand side, this is some of the literature that was shared. So James and Baldwin's from 1999, but that always goes down well, and that's something that's really well received. One of the conversations, the catalyst reading, we always have the UK Council for Graduate Education Good Supervisory Framework, you know, kind of what is good supervision, and so that's always useful, and they like that. And then there's a couple of the papers that I found, one from Vietnam and one from China, but you can see there the couple of quotes I've included that they talk about, as we find in the BCU programme, that it's not only the practical sharing with colleagues that we find, but also that multi-dimensional perspective, and also the information from the literature. So very similar to what we find in the BCU programme. So thinking about the successes, I mentioned there about the multidimensional, but also, you know, enriching practice by learning these new principles that they were then starting to use. And also thinking about how to play a good role. It was giving them kind of rigour to underpin their practice, and also going forward. They felt it was making a community and kind of less competitive that they quite liked. And I mentioned that the issues that came out in that pilot almost were very similar to the BCU model, and we found that again within the actual pilot, there was very similar issues. Yeah, and again, I mentioned about learning from members in literature and moving them beyond their own experience and that bubble of what we know, and also thinking about the potential for being involved in this paper, but also potential scholarly inquiry beyond this.
Just a couple of minutes left, Julia, if that's okay.
No problem. So you can see here, this is a quote from one of the Vietnamese partners, and you can see there that's that robust scientific foundation that I mentioned, and more rigour underpinning their practices, because obviously they don't, even though they're further in the academic career, they haven't had this in Vietnam, the professional development, and so yeah, they thought that was useful. And so on to the challenges is here in the UK. There's always issues with teams, and so some participants struggled and needed some of the partners to help facilitate that. There was also language barriers because it was delivered by the UK facilitators to UK facilitators, and I actually found that some of the partners who were involved were almost helping to facilitate with the language, so that was something to think about going forward. And there was confidence issues, whether you know, some people were quiet and whether they wanted to just listen, and we see that in the UK programme where we try and draw people out through the how we facilitate. There was issues across the time zone and some question about whether they should have local groups, but then that pushes back on, you know, what they were saying about the benefits of having them different cultures. And they did talk about, they like platforms, and talk about whether the catalyst reading could have been shared perhaps on Padlet or something beforehand, and talk more about it. So maybe a different platform than Teams. And although we didn't do the assessment, they did get a certificate for attendance, and that was quite beneficial, and they found in both arms of the project. And so on to the last slide. So this is where we are now at the end of the project, finished at the end of October. So thinking about what they're going to do about embedding both the EdD and this international version of the COP programme going forward. That's not been decided as yet, but you can see this project partner from Vietnam, you know, talks about how they, you know, they've got this gap that the professional development's not taking place, but there's insights that we found here, and you know, they think it would be useful, and that universities need these sessions and short courses to support their culture of excellence. And that's it. So now I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you,
No
Julia.
problem.
And I found that really interesting because I'm interested in transnational education and I'm currently working on a project looking at doctoral supervision. So yeah,
Oh, right,
it's really
wow,
interesting.
right up the street then.
Yeah. So yeah, opening the floor to questions now. We've got one already. So Tim, do you want to ask a question?
Hello, Julia. Thank you for that.
Hi.
Fantastic. I'm just interested in perhaps alluding slightly to where we're going with the next talk. I'm just interested in whether in those community of practice, given the kind of international and kind of cross multiple institution element, whether any of that dialogue, particularly around what effective supervision looks like, got into any discussion around methodology or epistemology and kind of whether there were different, because often between, even within an institution, there can be different ideas of what doctoral research looks like and what methodologies we might engage with and embrace. I was just interested in when you've kind of broadened that out to such a wide audience in terms of different contexts, was there any discussion that kind of linked into consideration of what doctoral research looks like and how we support and embrace different kinds of methodologies?
Yeah, thanks for that, Tim. I think in the BCU programme, definitely. And I mean, Sean, who I know is on the call, does a lot around like practice-based. So we know we often, in most ones I've facilitated, co-facilitated, have people from practice-based, so where they're not writing the 80,000 word thesis, there's also the, whether it's online or the artifact that they're making. So yeah, we often see that there, but I don't recall anything. I don't recall anything in this that got to that kind of got to that level. To be honest, it was more around like the practical level. I mean, what I would say that I've not put in there is the kind of like with the kind of between the different cultures, sometimes it was quite difficult. Like the one session that I co-facilitated, we were talking around like resources and what they do around like pastoral support, but it was quite difficult to try and get them to understand what we meant, if that made sense. So this is why I was saying it was really good to have some of the partners, like Trang, who's named on the paper, who's been involved in quite a lot of previous projects. She would often do like this code switching kind of thing, and I think that was really useful. But no, I don't remember anything going to that philosophical level. Not in.
Thanks, Julia.
No problem.
Julia, while I wait to see if there's any other hands, did you have BCU colleagues in the community of practice?
Yeah.
So supervisors.
Yeah. So in the same with the BCU one, we always have two facilitators, but they also act as members, if that makes sense, because we're not meant to be, seen as experts. So yes, in this one, we also had two people who co-facilitated all of the sessions, so we would kind of top and tail the sessions, if that makes sense, because obviously at the very beginning, the first one is very much about like the programming, Chatham House rules and that kind of thing, how it's going to work, the notes, the reading, that kind of thing. And then we will start off with the question. We've got prompts in the handbook, and then it would go whichever way they want it to go, which is interesting. So sometimes, even though we don't have a question about co-supervision, it can often go that way and have a whole conversation about that kind of thing, yeah.
Is there any plans to kind of merge the two programs together, like the one that's the BCU, or is that complicated in terms of accreditation and the things that you raised here?
I think the BCU one, unfortunately, we've moved away from the CEDA accreditation because the university have decided to, Birmingham City University decided to do that, and we're going to have an internal accreditation. That's the plan for that moving forward, but I'm not sure what will happen with this one that's been like piloted as part of this program, if that made sense. We're yet to see how that could and will be adapted, but I think the thing that, I mean, Sean, is who came up with the program. The questions really worked, and like I say, you know, I know, and you know, they're kind of basic, aren't they, around like what's research supervision, what's good supervision, what do I bring to this, who am I, how will I know? But they really generate that discussion. And
It's
so
an opener, isn't it, for discussion, right?
yeah. And the fact it was the same issues that came up, you know, that we see around like issues with co-supervision or issues about expectation, or, you know, is interesting. But what we did find in the pilot is we actually had people that turned up who weren't supervising, who were actually doctoral candidates, because they misunderstood when the EOI went out. But it actually gave a different angle to the conversations, and they didn't mind that so much. So whether that's something they might adopt, but like I say, they talked about they wanted a lot of local groups, and they wanted something like a Padlet kind of thing to discuss it more, because they didn't like teams. So, you know, they talked a lot about time zones, and time of year was difficult, as we see here, don't we? You know, the pinch points in the academic calendar and that kind of thing. So I think it would be like a, you know, whatever they do would be like a satellite version or their variation. I mean, BCU is not the only university that does the communities practice. Obviously, K. Guccione up in Glasgow, they've got their own version. And then we see within the RSVP project, don't we, you know, that heading up from York and UK Council of Graduate Education, we see that that's a big part of that, what they're trying to do. They're quite interesting communities of practice, but as a model, it definitely works, you know, it definitely generates conversation. But like I said at the start, it's meant to be the starting point, like speaking back to that previous presentation, that catalyst for going forward. But it was really good that people were already using it within their practice. They were really keen, you know, they were changing what they were doing with like master's students already, some of them. So yeah.
No, thank you. Really, really interesting. Thank you. And it does, I think Tim said, it moves nicely into the final presentation in this this section. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'm going to hand over to Tim Clark and Tom Dobson. Again, so same routine, so 20 minutes plus 10 for questions. I'll give you a 2-minute warning. People can add the questions to the chat, or equally they can raise their hand when we get to that point.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everyone. And firstly, thank you very much for sticking with us. I know we're the final presentation this afternoon, so thanks for sticking with us. And we would like to share with you our work, which is titled Going Against the Grain, which relates to thinking about EdD students' engagement with arts-based research. So my name is Tim Clark. I'm based at the University of the West of England, Bristol. I'm joined by Professor Tom Dobson from York St John University. We're both engaged in teaching and supervision on Doctorate in Education programmes. Tom is the director of the EdD at York St John. And this work links to a kind of slowly emerging project. We've probably been working together for 18 months, 2 years on this project at various stages. And today, our presentation is largely based on the second of 3 phases of the project. And I'll talk a bit about some of the kind of papers and share some of the resources from that as we go along. And it's perhaps interesting to highlight that actually this second phase, which relates to some interviews that we conducted with the EdD students, which we'll talk a little bit more about in terms of methodology in a minute, wasn't perhaps initially intended to be a kind of substantive part of the project. It was slightly more about kind of establishing context for the work, but there was such rich and interesting information that came out of this. And I was really interested in Kathleen Lynch's earlier characterization of this idea of epistemic disobedience, and perhaps there's some synergy with some of the things that were coming through from some of the interviews we did with the students here. So our intention is to share some of the background to the work, the approach that we've taken for this phase of the study, and to support with the context of this, we'll begin by giving some consideration of what the EdD and arts-based research are in terms of this project and why we think the relationship between them is worthy of focus. And we provide this because our study as a whole is grounded in an understanding that there are some specific things about the EdD's contextual, relational and practice-based nature which align particularly well with the value and potential of arts-based research. And therefore that enhanced understanding of the contextual factors within programs and institutions which may facilitate or preclude students' abilities to engage with arts-based research is important and has value as a focus. So in the spirit of embodying some aspects of arts-based research, I've sought to introduce some aspects of metaphor and imagery in our presentation today. And I begin with a local image for me of the Clifton Suspension Bridge here in Bristol, and a notion actually that came from one of the students of the Ed.D. as being a bridge, a metaphor of a bridge for the Ed.D. That was used to conceptualize the idea of the Ed.D. as being that link, that bridge between theory and practice for students who are engaged in study, but also between ideas of professional and academic spaces, professional and academic identities, professional and academic peers and colleagues, and professional and academic work. This is quite a kind of important idea for the work that we've been doing. So the Ed.D. is a professional doctorate which provides an academic pathway for education professionals spanning across education sectors, including areas like early years, community education, further and higher education, and is therefore studied by a wide range of education professionals, including lecturers and teachers. It typically encompasses a 2-year talk phase. So for example, in our institution, that's over a series of weekends through the first 2 years of the study, followed by a supervised practice-based research project. And importantly, these projects are often focused on generating learning and change within very specific and local contexts. So within an insider research within a professional context, for example. As highlighted here, the Ed.D. is the most popular professional doctoral degree route in the UK and internationally. And actually, and similarly, I think across the 2 schools that we're working in, here at UWE, for example, 90% of our postgraduate researchers within the School of Education are studying on a professional doctoral route. But as we'll expand, and interestingly, I know the last presentation drew quite a lot on Sian Vaughan's work, and we make some similar links in here. As we'll expand, frameworks, regulations, academic expectations that are often informed by understandings of the traditional PhD don't necessarily always align, and I think we've got reference to Sian's paper which highlights that here. So in terms of theorising the Ed.D., in our last paper we looked at early literature work on this as the relationship between arts-based research and the Ed.D. Captured in a paper titled Embracing Hybridity, where we use aspects of creative writing alongside some more traditional academic work, including a systematic literature or scoping literature review, to think about the Ed.D. and what it is and what that might mean for methodology. So here, in terms of the Ed.D., we understand ideas of knowledge creation as being more readily aligned with what is conceptualized as mode 2 knowledge. So that's to say knowledge which is contextual, applied and interdisciplinary, rather than mode 1 knowledge, which is understood as being more theoretical, abstract, disciplinary, and importantly, more so owned by the academy rather than, in this case, the workplace. And that potentially creates different methodological tensions for the Ed.D. compared to the PhD. So alongside that, we align that previous argument of the Ed.D. acting as a form of bridge between the academy and professional spaces, and a need to consider a balance in power and ownership between the academy and the workplace, driven by this objective to be of value professionally. And we suggest that that has some implications and relevance when we think about methodologies that are supported or facilitated within that space. In response to that, the previous work has theorized 3 generations of doctoral models when looking at professional doctoral study, progressing from first generation doctoral models, which were reminiscent of the PhD, structurally dominated by the academy and perhaps more in keeping with that understanding of mode 1 knowledge. Increasingly, what we've seen in recent years is discussion or conceptualization of second and third generation doctoral models, often conceptualized by literature from Australia, which embraced partnership and eventually move us towards this idea that actually the professional candidate should be taking a leading role in deciding actually what thesis, what artifacts, what methodology looks like within that relationship. And this is where we make links here to Sian Vaughan's work around the role of academic regulations and expectations within institutions. And we particularly like this notion of hierarchy of legitimacy, the idea that some methodologies, some approaches, some forms of writing are more appropriate or more important than others within the academy. I'm going to hand over to Tom for the next part of the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So I'm just going to talk for a little bit about arts-based research. We use the book, which is the Handbook of Arts-Based Research by Patricia Levy, to define arts-based research for our paper, which Tim mentioned earlier, and we'll have the full reference at the end of this presentation for our paper. And Patricia Levy, interesting person, interesting in terms of her work on arts-based research. And she talks about arts-based research either as something that you might do methodologically for the whole of your study. So you might adopt a methodological approach in arts-based research, which becomes the entirety of your project, or it could just be a small component of the project. So you might, for example, use something like photo elicitation during your interviews to generate data. It might also apply to the way in which you end up writing your study and presenting your study as well. And that was certainly something that I was interested in when I did my PhD. I know we're not talking about the EdD there necessarily. And apologies, my dog has just entered the room if you wondered what that door was slamming earlier. So what Patricia Levy says is that arts-based research, you can split it into three areas: that which is literary, so to do with writing, creative writing, the visual, and the performative as well. And for the paper that Tim was referring to earlier, we use creative writing, so a form of literary arts-based research, to try and embody the argument that we were making. We didn't want to write a traditional academic article about arts-based research without bringing some form of arts-based research into it. So our paper is deliberately hybrid. And I suppose you could say that's like it's kind of like a second generation thesis that Tim was referring to on the previous slide. Okay, here's a big table, which may be useful to you. I'm not going to read everything that's on there, but for the paper that we did in Teaching in Higher Education, what we did was we looked at some of the key sort of theories around the EdD, the professional doctorate, and we looked at some of the key theories around arts-based research, and we tried to map them in order to make a theoretically informed argument that students who are doing the EdD should be thinking about using arts-based research and should be given permission to do so. So we found sort of 6 key theoretical similarities, one around practice. Now, obviously, the practice of arts and arts-based research is slightly different from the practice of, for example, being a teacher, but both have similarities in terms of it being embodied, a living inquiry. We talk about knowledge as well. So that idea, the EdD is mode 2 knowledge, so knowledge that's generated from practice. And similarly, arts-based research, transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary knowledge. We thought about relationality. So a lot of EdD theses, they focus on the relationship between and foreground the relationship between the researcher and their participants. Similarly, with arts-based research, perhaps the relationship between the artist and people that they've encountered in their life is explored through the artwork and then explored again through sharing of the work with their audiences. So that idea of intersubjectivity comes into play. Certainly reflexivity is foregrounded in both. The EdD, there's a lot around positionality. Most EdDs would have at least a section on that, and arts-based research is seen as a way of promoting critical consciousness. Audience, I think, is the big one. So what we're interested in terms of the EdD is the potential for that thesis not just to sit in a library on a shelf gathering dust, but also to be read by audiences in practice who'll be impacted by the work. So the work becomes impactful. And obviously that's something that's really important in terms of arts-based research. And then because of that importance of impacting audiences, there is this focus on modes of expression. Modes of expression that can be impactful, resulting in the thesis becoming hybrid. Apologies, Sian, there for the typo in your surname. We'll rectify that after our presentation. And also in terms of yeah, obviously with arts-based research, there's that idea of the artifact being impactful, being evocative, and eliciting a different kind of response. So yeah, that's essentially that mapping activity which appears in our article is our argument as to why students on the EdD should be at least permitted to engage in arts-based research. So as Tim said, we started a project in January. We're just coming to the end of it. We've got our final session in a couple of weeks' time, where we've worked with EdD students from both of our institutions, and these are students who are interested in arts-based research. They're at different stages of their EdD, but all of them have gone through phase one, the taught part of the programme. And in many respects, in line with the work that we'd read before, a lot of them felt that using arts-based research meant that they were going against the grain of what was perhaps expected in higher education. So yeah, we're just going to, the second part of this presentation, we're going to talk about that study. There were two stages. Phase one, in January, we interviewed the 9 students using narrative interviews to really try and understand their motivations for doing the EdD, and also trying to understand their interest and for some of them their use of arts-based research, so interest in and use of arts-based research. We then did an action learning set. So similar to what Julia was saying about the community of practice, we employed that kind of methodology with them. And I think Tim's going to talk about that in a moment. But for phase one of the study, we've written that up as a paper that has been accepted by Impacting Ed. And we use Glavinew's 5A's theory to help explore and analyze and illuminate what was going on in those narratives. Now, Glavinew talks about actors, actions, artifacts, audiences, and affordances. And whilst I'm always slightly skeptical about theories which use alliteration like that, because I sometimes think there must have been some better words, more accurate words, it's a useful way of thinking about creativity within a sociological context or ecological context. So rather than thinking about creativity as something that is enacted by a genius, it tends to be, this shifts the focus onto the social structures that surround the individual that permit creativity. And as I said before, what we've been interested in is whether or not students are permitted to be creative and use arts-based research as part of their EdD, and focusing on that and their experiences of using arts-based research on the EdD. Tim, was I going to hand over to you here? Is that right?
Yep, I don't mind picking up that. So this is just some brief context of, and we've talked a little bit about this. This is engaging with students across the 2 programs. A group of students, importantly, that included students both with and without experiences and identities linked to the arts, which became quite an interesting area of focus in our later work around this. It was predominantly students involved in the project who were either at the end of the talk phase or the EdD or the beginning of the research phase, which had obviously implications for where they were in terms of thinking about methodology. And they also reflected quite a diverse range of different contexts across education. So conscious of time, do you want to move us on to the next one, Tom? So I'm not going to read all of this out, but what we just wanted to do is share and give you an opportunity just to see how we conceptualized that within the paper. So we developed a series of 6 vignettes for the paper, which, as Tom says, has recently been accepted for publication, which looked at using that 5A's idea. It was a kind of very iterative process where we were using writing and using that theory to kind of develop and think about this in it collaboratively. which drew both parallels between those stories of the students, but also looked at kind of points of difference and key experiences and perspectives on this. But the notion across all of those stories was we captured, and hence the title, this idea of it often being positioned as an act of going against the grain, either deliberately, I'm doing this because it's an act of activism and I'm challenging something, or it's provocation, or in some cases, perhaps more tentatively, I'm engaging with arts-based research. It feels right for my context. However, I'm worried about how it fits with what's expected, or what the regulations are, or what's going to happen when I get to my Viva. So we capture Philip's vignette here, which is one of 6 that's included in the paper, and we looked at that through that lens of 5 A's. So, for example, in Philip's vignette here, we talk about Philip seeing the use of arts-based research as being driven by professional audience first. So academic audience second, professional audience first. I'm kind of challenging this notion. He talks about kind of deliberately wanting to kind of challenge and resist that structure and work with what felt right in his professional context, not what first and foremost he thought he'd be expected to do in terms of an academic context. We looked at this through this idea of affordances, and Philip talking about giving voice to participants, trying to be evocative in relation to his approach. And we looked at these vignettes in relation to who the kind of key actors were within this. What role did the supervisor play? What role did the teaching and learning within the talk part play? What role do the structures within the university, the forms I have to fill in, all of those kind of things? How are they part of this kind of ecosystem which sits around the project and either, and we often use this term, either facilitates or precludes the permission to engage with this. So again, conscious of time, Tom, if you can move us on to this one where we kind of summarize the key ideas that form the discussion for that paper. So essentially that paper is built around talking about 3 areas which were particularly prominent in the early interviews and discussions with these students. And those were firstly audiences and structures. So thinking about competing and considering potentially competing audiences, including different expectations perhaps between the academic and professional context. Sometimes, as I say, that was seen to be a direct act of trying to challenge some of those structures. Other times it was seen as an area of anxiety or concern for students. So as we've got in the quotes here, that idea of we've got standardized paperwork designed for serious research. Where does my work fit within that? One of the students talked about an ongoing battle for justification and rigor, the whole process being a kind of having to resist and operating in a difficult space. There was lots of exploration around ideas of identity and self, and that both in relation to thinking about kind of artist identities and the background students were coming from. A group of, or a proportion of the students that were involved in the project were directly involved in the arts. They were artist teachers or they'd come from arts background, but we also had a group who were engaged and definitely didn't relate to that and had come to this kind of from a philosophical standpoint, from a new standpoint in terms of engaging with the Ed.D. And it was interesting actually that perhaps there wasn't an enormous amount of concern that you needed to identify as an artist in order to engage with this. But sometimes, and as we've kind of captured in the quotes here, there was the opposite side of that there were perhaps there was this idea of it linking with an artist and identity and an entanglement or a complexity of deciding, where one stops and another one starts and what is and isn't appropriate and how that's influencing the work. And then this final area was around action and agency. There was a strong thread throughout the phase and the later action learning phase that Tom mentioned, where this was something that there was lots of discussion about. So the idea that arts-based research was often driven by values, a sense of activism, a strong feeling that actually what was important was making a direct local difference. But did that always fit in with the expectation of what I need to do in order to be assessed, pass my exam, defend my work, etc.? And some students talked about being drawn to this in learning in their talk phase. So it being important that there was some introduction to a broader methodological spectrum that allowed some discussion and consideration of arts-based research as part of the talk phase of the work. And if I've got time, we're just going to
Yeah, just 1 minute. That's
briefly,
all right.
thank you. Just some questions, some provocations that came out of this initial phase in terms of thinking about implications, and we were fortunate enough to be able to share these a week or so ago with the UK EdD Directors Network, who are obviously a really good audience for talking about implications and relevance to this at programme level. And just to say briefly, because I can let you kind of read through those questions on there. As Tom said, the next phase of this work, and the phase that we're just about to finish, was that we then, from these interviews, developed an action learning set with the students, with the 9 students who were involved. It was an online action learning set across the 2 universities, which provided a really interesting space and mechanism for students to engage in discussion and kind of problematization of some of the things that are being explored here. We thought that was of real value. We're working on kind of writing up and analysing that at the moment, with a view to hopefully co-authoring something with that action learning set, which has included some engagement with arts-based methods as part of that, including students generating creative writing, zines, photography, etc., in relation to and response to the action learning set. So that's the kind of next part of the work. But as I say, today's content is very much based on the interviews, which at the start were kind of, let's get some context and understand who's engaging with the action learning set. But actually, there were those, through those vignettes, there was a lot of interesting discussion that came out of that we wanted to capture. So we'll just finish by sharing some of the work that's been published or is about to be published relating to this project. As we said, the Going Against the Grain paper is recently been accepted by Impacting Education, which is a journal focused on the EdD, published in America, and will be available hopefully at some point early next year. So thank you all very much for your time. Obviously happy to take any questions.
Oh, thank you very much. Really interesting. Yeah, as it happens, also involved in our institutional EdD interest in art space. I've chosen the right session to chair. Any questions from the floor? I can ask one to get where people are thinking. I was interested because you talked that some people had an experience of arts-based approaches before and some didn't. I was just interested to know whether you because you talked about learning and teaching and the impact that had, because I know in our own, on our own programme, when we've introduced arts-based approaches, it's had quite a significant effect on some participants who've gone on to use those approaches in their own work. So did you find similar? Is that how it, for those who had no experience, was it through the learning and teaching or through other routes that they developed an interest?
I think there were certainly some who talked in their interviews and have talked in the action learning set around the importance of the kind of almost it being legitimized by there being discussion and talk content around that. And obviously the interesting thing about this specific project is we are both actively involved in teaching and supervision on the EdD programs connected to that. And I think what we highlight in the paper is, whilst neither have a kind of explicit focus on this is an EdD with an arts-based focus, it's one of many different understandings that are introduced as part of that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Tom.
I'll just add to it. I mean, we did a scoping review, which is part of the first paper, the one in teaching and higher education, and that essentially we were looking at articles which capture EdD students' experiences of arts-based research, and all of those articles, there weren't many, we only found 6. They tended to be people who had been artists in some form outside of university before they started their EdD. Now, what we found with our study was that we drew upon a kind of wider pool of people in terms of the 9 students we've been working with. Some of them have got artist backgrounds. The majority don't. And actually, some of them who've got no backgrounds in the arts at all have really taken to their chosen form of arts-based research. So Philip, for example, was a secondary science teacher. Initially, when I started working, quite a positivist mindset, and he's really embraced creative writing and seen it as a way of emancipating his participants and allowing their voices to be heard. So it's an interesting one. And then so one of the participants who as his previous career was a professional artist and drawer. He's actually more reticent about using his drawing skills as an arts-based approach to research, as he feels that potentially it undermines the research that he's trying to do into the history of drawing and how drawing is positioned in schools. Because he's accomplished in drawing, he feels that that will create a power dynamic for him then to bring that into his project.
Yeah. Eleanor, I see you've got your hand up. Do you want to?
Yes, that's okay if we have time.
Yeah.
So I'm an EdD student and I'm doing arts-based research, and it never, I guess, going into in even early stages of thinking through my proposal and applying to my program, it kind of never occurred to me not to be doing like, it wasn't like I decided arts-based research. I just knew that art was a vehicle through which I wanted to do my research. And I wondered if you had thought about the culture within your programs and your institutions and how much they're informing those some of the experiences, because I think with the way that you've talked about even like the forms, for instance, and to me, I've certainly not experienced a lot of those barriers, but then I guess I also have chosen an institution where I felt that my approach to research was welcomed and supported from the outset. So I wondered how much you had thought about not necessarily what it says about EdD programs or arts-based research, but the actual specific cultures within the institutions that you operate in.
Thank you, Eleanor. Shall I pick that up? Tom, yeah. I mean, I think absolutely that's, and I think our focus, obviously, in terms of these phases of direct work that we're doing at the moment are very much limited to the kind of context of the students that we are working with. So, I mean, I guess the idea of a kind of that 5A's approach and looking at almost the kind of ecology around the program, and whether that's institutional, we talk about kind of micro and macro contexts, what happens in the program, how does that align with what happens in the institution and what the regulations look like, etc. So I think that is, yeah, that's definitely a key part of this work. I think what's been interesting is we have had some opportunities to share this more widely, including with kind of other EdD programs, etc. And I think there are certainly some aspects of that where there are some synergies beyond that, and there are kind of different, obviously lots of different contexts and lots of different perspectives on that. But I mean, I think what you're absolutely right, and what you're talking about is kind of at the heart of where we started with this. Really, we were interested in what does this look like within our programs. What can the action learning set do as a mechanism, for example, for making this more explicit and then allowing some dialogue around it and allowing some of these kind of different perspectives to be raised. So I mean, I think there's bits of that happening within the project, but I think it's a very kind of valid point that reflects some of what we are hoping to do locally in terms of engaging in this way. I don't know if you had anything to add to that, Tom.
No, I mean, it sounds to me like Eleanor made a very good choice in terms of her institution. You know, it seems like it really suits you and your approach to research. Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen in the literature is there is this idea that arts-based research is quite often going against the grain with the EdD, and there's been a lack of research focus on it. I mean, as I indicated before, when we did a scoping review, we only found 6 articles which explored EdD students' use of arts-based research, which was quite low. And some of the sort of background research to this as well, I used to work at Leeds Beckett, and I did a small scale study there. And I think a lot of the students there felt that they had a lack of agency in terms of decisions about how they presented and wrote their thesis. So there is definitely, I think, in a lot of institutions, issues relating to that. And I think a lot of those issues are around supervisor expectations of what constitutes research and what a thesis should look like. And it's not that those supervisors are wrong. We just want to bring arts-based research more centrally into some of those discussions because of the theoretical similarities, and we feel that actually the arts-based research could be more readily used by EdD students to have real impact on audiences and to make research therefore more evocative and more impactful.
Oh, thank you. And I think that's a good call for all of us, isn't it, to carry on this work and open it up a bit more. So thank you to Tim and Tom for their presentation, and also, yeah, also to our other speakers in this session, so Suena, Herder, Julia. Thank you all for coming. And just to tell you that we have one more session in the conference today. It's the closing session by the CEO of SRHE, Claire Laughlin Chow. So I think if you go back to your timetable, you'll be able to link into that session, which starts at 5. So there's still a bit of time for you to pass across to that meeting room. So thank you very much. Lovely to see you all virtually, and enjoy the rest of your evening.